Welcome to this explainer. If you're watching a pro tennis match, you're probably focused on the sheer athleticism, the strategic brilliance, and that intense one-on-one rivalry playing out right in front of you. But what if I told you that you've been missing a crucial player on the court? That every single tennis match is not actually a two-way duel, but a three-way battle. It's player versus what scientists and sports analysts call the invisible opponent, the court surface itself. Today, we're going to unpack the hidden physics, the intense biomechanics, and the data-driven strategies that dictate who wins and who loses based entirely on the ground beneath their feet. All right, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the physics of the bounce, move into the biomechanics of shoe contact, look at how court surfaces impact injuries, and finally explore analytics and adapting strategy. Section 1. The physics of the bounce. This is our invisible third player. Think about the raw materials of a tennis court. They literally rewrite the fundamental laws of physics the second the ball leaves the racket. Take grass courts, for example. The surface is slick, it's organic, the ball skids with a super fast pace, stays really low, bounces unpredictably, and crucially, it keeps a high amount of its kinetic energy after hitting the ground. It's an absolute lightning-fast reaction game. But then flip that completely for clay courts. Made of crushed brick and shale, clay slows the pace way down and gives you this high, looping bounce. The friction between the fuzz of the tennis ball and that gritty clay causes massive energy absorption by the surface itself. It's kind of like trying to bounce a ball on wet sand versus on a marble floor. The real kicker here is represented by this single number, 43%. Up to 43% of a tennis ball's kinetic energy can just be literally swallowed up and absorbed by the crushed brick of a clay court upon impact. This brilliantly explains why baseline rallies on clay look so incredibly grueling. Players aren't just fighting the person across the net, they are fighting a surface that is constantly draining the speed out of their shots. You literally have to swing harder with way more topspin just to push the ball through the court. It changes the entire physical requirement of the sport. Moving right along to Section 2, the biomechanics of shoe contact. So that perfectly transitions us from how the ball interacts with the ground to how the human body interacts with it. Just think about this for a second. Why do players slide so gracefully, sometimes for several feet, into a shot on clay, but if they tried that exact same movement on a hard court, they'd practically shatter their ankles? The answer lies in the physical danger of deceleration and the invisible forces working against the athlete's body weight, and it all boils down to one core scientific principle. And that principle is the coefficient of friction. Basically, this is just a measurement of the resistance to motion between two surfaces that are in contact. In tennis, this number dictates whether a player's shoe will safely glide across the granular top layer of a clay court or violently and instantly grip the acrylic surface of a hard court. The coefficient of friction is the master switch that controls human movement out there. If it's too low, the player slips and falls. If it's too high, the foot stops dead, but the player's momentum keeps flying forward, which creates a massive risk for joint trauma. Because of this, sports engineers actually have to design technological solutions just to combat this invisible opponent. Players definitely can't wear the same shoes on different courts. For clay, engineers design a full herringbone tread that literally catches those loose sand particles, letting the player control their slide almost like a skier on snow. On hard courts, they use a modified multi-directional tread packed with heavy shock absorbers to survive those violent, high-friction stops. And grass? Well, the friction is so dangerously low on damp grass that the shoes are covered in tiny rubber pimples. They basically act like weird miniature golf cleats just to keep players upright. The shoe's really your primary weapon against the court's physics. Section 3. Court surfaces and injuries. Let's look at the physical toll. When we move up the kinetic chain from the shoe to the human body, the medical data gives us a pretty fascinating look at how different surfaces actually attack the athlete. On hard courts, we see a massive spike in acute joint and tendon shock. All those jarring stops we just talked about, they send shock waves directly up the shins and knees. On clay, the joint shock is lower because the surface gives way, but prolonged muscle fatigue is sky high. Why? Because those energy-absorbing rallies we mentioned earlier force the muscles to stay engaged way longer. Finally, on grass courts, the primary risk shifts to the lower back, mostly because players have to stay extremely low to catch that unpredictable bounce. Plus, you get sudden growing or muscle tears just from slipping. To really put this hard court data into perspective, consider this staggering fact.
When a pro tennis player sprints to the corner and slams on the brakes on an acrylic hard court, the deceleration forces can exceed 3 to 4 times their entire body weight in mere milliseconds. Imagine a 180-pound athlete suddenly having over 600 pounds of force jammed straight through their ankle and knee joints in the blink of an eye. That sheer microscopic violence makes all that abstract medical data instantly relatable. The court is quite literally fighting back.
Which brings us to our final chapter, Section 4, Analytics and Adapting Strategy. So, we've seen the physics, we've seen the biomechanics, and we've seen the injuries. How do you actually tame the invisible opponent? Well, modern tennis coaching has evolved into what's called the dynamic systems coaching approach. It's essentially a 3-step method to hack the surface. Step 1 is surface data capture. Coaches use telemetry to track exactly how the ball is bouncing and how the player's biomechanics are holding up. Step 2 is motor skill adjustment. Based on that data, they'll actually re-engineer the player's footwork, teaching them to slide on clay or take stutter steps on grass, and they'll tweak the swing paths to account for the bounce. Finally, step 3 is tactical recalibration. You shift your entire shot selection purely on the surface. You use way more drop shots on clay because the heavy court makes it brutal for the opponent to sprint forward. On grass, you'd employ completely different, hyper-aggressive tactics. And honestly, there is no better example of tactical recalibration than the serve and volley strategy. The win probability for this tactic is totally reliant on the surface. On grass, where the ball skids low and fast, serving and immediately rushing the net is incredibly viable because the opponent barely has time to react. But on clay, that slow, high bounce gives the opponent all the time in the world to line up a passing shot and blow right past you at the net. An entire tactical identity that is virtually unbeatable on one surface is rendered completely useless on another, entirely because of the dirt or grass under their feet.
This brings us to an absolute mic drop summary from sports analytics researchers. They note, the surface does not merely influence the match, it dictates the biological and tactical prerequisites for the champion. You really can't just be a great tennis player anymore. You have to be a master of applied physics. You got to be a biomechanical chameleon. Mastering the surface and adapting to its unique friction and energy absorption is the true secret to dominating the sport. Which leaves us with this final, provocative thought for this explainer. Today, the vast majority of tournaments are moving toward a standardized, universal hard court to lower maintenance costs and create predictable TV schedules. But as we've learned today, the extreme variations of grass and clay are exactly what force those brilliant scientific, biological, and tactical adaptations that make the sport so incredibly complex. So, is the modern homogenization of court surfaces erasing the beautiful, scientific extremes of our invisible opponent? It's definitely a question worth pondering the next time you tune into a match. Thank you so much for joining me to explore the hidden science of tennis. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll catch you next time.